Good morning. I'm Greg Henschel from Octay, and I'm happy to introduce our speaker today, Josh Carpenter. Josh is going to share the story about how he and others put career and technical education at the heart of his city's push to revive their flagging economy in Birmingham. The struggle of Birmingham made me think about the Department of Education's mission to promote student achievement and preparation for global competitiveness by fostering educational excellence and ensuring equal access. Birmingham's been striving to put those elements together and has been guided by the insight that in today's economy, the jobs and economic benefits are going to flow to places that are best prepared to do jobs with a high knowledge content. And they assumed that all students could achieve that. Josh?
Well, good morning, Greg, and again, thank you so much for this opportunity, and thanks to all of you who made time for this and made this conversation a priority. Greg's let me know that many of you not only lead some of the most important programs in our country, but particularly as it relates to education, but also that you have a focus on equity and particularly racial and economic mobility. And that's something that is not just important to us from a philosophical or abstract sense in Birmingham. It is our economy. It is our future. Birmingham is, maybe a little bit of background could be helpful to start. I think most people know Birmingham for our role in the civil rights movement of the 60s. We were at once the cradle of the civil rights movement, but also the center, the epicenter for racial oppression. It was in Birmingham where dogs were unleashed on children marching for equality in Kelly Ingram Park, and it was in Birmingham where 4 little girls were killed by a bomb on 16th Street Baptist Church. It is also Birmingham where people have been reckoning with systemic and political and policy-oriented racism and oppression. And the modern manifestations of separate but equal are still here in our community. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that today, but I'm going to talk about it from an economic development lens. My job is to think very hard every day about how we can create economic opportunity for the 4th largest majority black city in America, a city where 30% of our residents live in poverty, 43% of families with children, where 55% of Birmingham City School students live in poverty, and where too many of our students don't choose a post-secondary pathway because they didn't have the exposure or they felt disconnected from the very businesses that were just a few miles from their high school. So everything that we're doing today, everything that we will discuss here is rooted in a vision of creating economic opportunity as a means of creating economic sustainability for the community that I live in, that I care about. And I'll talk a little bit about it from a couple of different angles, but I think that what your mission is just absolutely core to who we are, and I was grateful that that Greg brought it up to kick us off. So I lead our Department for Innovation and Economic Opportunity, and I got here, there's a longer story, but the mayor, who I'll mention here in a minute, asked me to lead his transition committee for economic development, which I thought would absolve me from ever having to formally work for him. I was at the University of Alabama at Birmingham, where I led a portfolio of initiatives for the president and taught in the business school. But I'll say why I landed here. My first job out of high school out of college was teaching. I taught in Perry County, Alabama, home of Coretta Scott King. And I was a school teacher and a football coach, and we were practicing for the fall season. I think it was 2010, and my one of my best athletes, his name was Kenny. He was 6'1", 190 pounds, and ran like a gazelle. And in Alabama, ordinarily it's God, and then it's football and barbecue, pretty close in that order. And so we were out practicing, and Kenny, had he been in almost any other city, any other school system, would have already been noticed by by local colleges to go play. He was just a gifted athlete. But in the heat, the sort of sweltering, notorious Alabama heat, he was running a play which we ran every day, and he made the type of scream that every parent, every coach dreads hearing. And as I ran over to see what had happened, it was clear that Kenny had suffered a compound fracture. And we were, at the time, I think Perry County wasn't just a poor county, it was the fifth poorest county in America. So we didn't have a trainer, we didn't have a hospital in the county. And so I picked up the phone and I called 911, and I'll never forget that moment, because it took them, and I remember the operator saying, "Coach Carpenter, I'm so sorry, but there are two ambulances near you. One is in Selma, 45 minutes away, and the other one's in Demopolis, 30 minutes away. They're both making drop-offs." And so it took them 45 minutes to get an ambulance to my student. By that time, his mother had showed up to the field, and I remember her saying, not "how's my baby?" She instead said, "I don't know how we're going to pay for whatever's next because I just lost my job." And I realized at that point that in America, more so than perhaps any other country, your job determines so much of your future, and that jobs truly are inextricably linked with freedom in the most philosophical sense, whether that's freedom to purchase a home that might get you into a different school system, or to provide your health coverage, or to purchase a car to get you to physical therapy. And so it was at that point that I started thinking about how can I use my life to be a part of creating jobs for people, and then making sure that they get the types of jobs that give them an opportunity to succeed. And that's how we got here. And I know that that's exactly what Mayor Woodson cares about too. So I kind of want to walk through the timeline of Birmingham's most recent years and how we sort of arrived at where we are. In 2015, we were named a Tech Hire City by the White House, and there was Jubilee here in Birmingham. We thought that was a fantastic thing, but what it really meant was that we had a problem. It meant that we had posted far more jobs than we had tech talent in our community. In fact, I think on a per capita basis, Birmingham had the second fastest IT job growth. So we posted about, I think, 14,600 jobs, but that was on a denominator of less than 40,000 IT professionals. So we really needed to sort of pick up the pace. So in 2016, I was at UAB, and I led a group of people in 35 community partners to do what Jamie Maristotis in his book, America Needs Talent, says, help employers shift from being consumers of talent to being co-creators of talent. And so we blended together programs at two-year colleges, at high schools, and at four-year colleges, and sort of directly connected employers, particularly those hiring for tech talent, all across the pipeline. And we were able to secure a grant from the U.S. Department of Labor and train about 1,000 young people for IT jobs. The program's been really successful. We've actually placed about 80% of the people who finish the program within 3 to 6 months, and most of those folks keep those jobs. So I want to talk a little bit about how we got there. We use the phrase demand-driven a lot. We understand that you do as well, but the point for us is to really tie together not just global demand, but demand in our regional economy. So we had a sort of three-pronged approach at three different levels. We had the boot camp, which was focused on really developing software developers, and then Generation, which is a McKinsey & Company actually helped co-create that curriculum with us to create opportunities for computer support specialists. They're getting paid about $22 an hour, but there was no program inside a two-year college or a four-year college or high school that was training people for those jobs. So we had about 300 vacancies. We've now sort of pivoted that approach, and we have data analytics as a part of it. We also worked with Jefferson State Community College and Lawson State Community College, which is a two-year college, and HBCU, historically black college and university here in Birmingham. And then those stacked into where I was at the time, the University of Alabama at Birmingham. So this is sort of what we built, and this highway to quality jobs. And what we really focused on, and what I'll draw your attention to, is sort of the demand side of that pipeline, or the supply side rather, that there were 26,000 opportunity youth in the Birmingham region. So we had identified 26,000 young people between the ages of, I think it was 17 and 29, who either weren't enrolled in education, weren't employed, and were not in any type of sort of training or development opportunity. So our challenge was to identify them, support them through education, and then connect them to these opportunities. And what we really wanted to do was recognize that earning and learning was fundamental to much of their success, particularly for single moms. And so we spent a lot of our time trying to design pathways that met people where they were. And many people actually just needed a job as soon as possible. So the boot camp model was amenable to where they were. And so it met them, and they were able to take advantage of that, get a job. And so I'll tell the story of Alante quickly, who dropped out of his college he actually dropped out of UAB in December of 2016. In February of 2017, he signs up, finishes the curriculum May 8th of 2017. He gets hired by the University of Alabama at Birmingham as an employee to help fix people who were, need tech support. And in July of that year, he was named the #1 computer support specialist at the university. And then just this past May, he finished his college degree as a computer scientist at UAB. But this time, he got it all paid for, and he's almost done paying off his debt. So this program has been a phenomenal opportunity for us, not just to tell stories and make stories like the one that Alante has, but also to connect people all across the pipeline, from the high school student to the employer. And I want to just mention something quickly from an economic development perspective, because I want to tether back to sort of the racial equity part of our mission. Birmingham is, as a metro area, about 1.2 million people. The city of Birmingham has about 212,000 residents who live there at night. But during the daytime, our population is about 600,000, 500 to 600,000. The interesting piece of that puzzle is that our daytime population looks very different than our nighttime population. And the bottom line reality is that for many of the students in our 7 high schools, they had never set foot in any of the companies that were downtown. They had no idea what it could be like to work for a Regions Bank or a Blue Cross Blue Shield. And so it became abundantly clear to us that there wasn't just an education gap, there wasn't just an opportunity gap, there was a real exposure gap and a relational gap. And it tended to fall pretty evenly across racial lines. And so we had a responsibility to leverage our role as a university then, but now as a government, to figure out how we can build these connections so that we can build a more cohesive community. So the program has been successful, and this is just a picture of the first graduation class. And what I think is really important to mention here is that these students actually help diversify the workforce in Birmingham. And so what I think is true is that we have now a real opportunity to not just create more talent, but to diversify the talent base of Birmingham. And that has certainly been true thus far. So in 2017, I actually moved over, and we lost a project. It was called Project Aurora, and we lost the project, and the #1 reason we lost it is because people that the site selector, the economic development partnership, which it ended up being about 1,200 jobs, that we liked Birmingham, and it was probably the best location in terms of its physical location, its quality of life, its cost of living, but we weren't convinced that you had enough talent there in the area to meet our needs. And so the conversation, not just among educators, but also among employers, began to shift around what are the transformational investments that we can and should be making in order to get more people jobs and prepared for demand-driven areas. So Mayor Woodfin was elected, and I have to confess that he and I were personal friends before he was elected, and he was the school board president. So he brings an education mindset to the mayor's office, and he would love to be known as the education mayor, but more than that, one that connected education to the social, economic, and long-term well-being of the business community. And so I put this quote up here, as he's one of the youngest mayors in the country as well, just turned 39, but was elected, and he brings this spirit, and I just give you this as background. He knocked on 50,000 doors in Birmingham, literally wore out the bottom leather of his shoes, knocking on doors to tell his story, and frankly, one when nobody expected it. But this is sort of his philosophy, and I think this slide really does encapsulate kind of where Birmingham is. So in 2018, we put together a report that many of our business leaders actually joined us in producing, called what we call the Building It Together report. This report had a sort of social media campaign around it, and what the report actually did, and we worked with Burning Glass Technologies and the Center for Adult Education and Learning to produce sort of qualitative and quantitative insights to have, as we say it, here in the South, have everybody singing out of the off the same song sheet. And so we just needed a common set of data points, right? I'm sure that every listener on this call has heard this before, where provosts of colleges say, we're producing great talent. And then you talk to the employers in the same community, and they say, well, it's not the right talent for my company. And so what we wanted to do was build a common set of facts and a website that would allow people to sort of gather around the data, and we launched a series of conversations from pastors in our community to influencers to conversations at barbershops and nail salons, at schools certainly. But we wanted to make sure that everybody knew that there were new goals and what workforce development could and should look like in Birmingham, and that we needed to create new transformational initiatives to make things happen. So here's where we landed. On the left side of the slides, you'll see sort of the good things that are happening in our community. Shipt, which is a company that sort of delivers groceries here, and they're in D.C. Some of you may be Shipt members. They're headquartered here. They created 881 jobs here. And in Birmingham, we actually ended up hiring, I think the latest number in 2019 is 5,300 residents. So these are residents of the city of Birmingham were hired. Our employment rate had actually gone up 7% since we've been in office, and yet we still had enormous problems in our community. And I can talk a lot about that. The mobility rate was pulled from Raj Chetty's study, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. But I really want to draw you to the top two circles there. First, our unemployment rate is actually, as you know, way underreported. So many workers have become disenchanted and have become what economists would call structurally unemployed. They were long-term unemployed. But then 1 in 5 workers were considered high-skilled. And what that really means is that our community was particularly vulnerable to a recession. And as you all know, we've just entered one. And in many cases, as the CEO from Burning Glass has said to us in the past, COVID-19 has finished what automation started. And so for many workers in our community, they have lost jobs or were losing jobs. And so what we decided to do was focus on the racial equity gap as well. And that Policy Link article is really important. But the cost of racial equity is what we tried to exert into the conversation. And what we mean by that is that if the same income levels for Black people were held equal with white people in our community would have basically $9.28 billion worth more of wealth, 16% of our GDP. And so what we just started framing the racial inequity in our economy as is that it was actually a tax, a really important tax on our community, and we needed to figure out the ways in which we could address it. So we launched a new department. I moved over to the city, and our goal really was to build a public-private partnership. And I think one of the things that's most important for me to say here is we took the CEOs of the major companies in our community, Regions Bank, which is a Fortune 500 company headquartered here, the University of Alabama at Birmingham, which is the fourth largest public hospital and has about 23,000 employees, Alabama Power, which is a major utility company throughout the state, the Blue Cross Blue Shield, which is a major health insurer, and Altech, which is a really large privately held company. And we walked those CEOs through a long conversation, a conversation about racial equity, a conversation about labor market outcomes, and a conversation that sort of bore directly on the long-term sustainability of each of those anchor institutions, each of their businesses. And so what we came up with is actually most of the job growth has consolidated in major cities, particularly coastal cities in the U.S., especially since the Great Recession. So it really accelerated this trend of consolidating economic growth to just a few places in America. And so what we knew is that Birmingham needed a new strategy for economic competitiveness. And we needed a clear sort of investment strategy, if you will, for Birmingham to return to the prosperity that it once had as a city that built America in the early 1920s. So looks like, unfortunately, my connection has lost here for a second. Let me try to see if I can fix it. Let's see. Sorry about that.
Hey, Josh, it looks like you're back in. We can hear you still. If you need me to advance the slides, just let me know. But I do see your name back in the Connect. So please continue.
Perfect. So I think I'm back in. So let's see if that works. So what was our 5-year agenda? What were we looking for? We broke it down into sort of 3 basic categories from an economic development, economic competitiveness lens. So job creation, job preparation, and job access. So job creation, are we creating the quality jobs that we need for a durable economy? Job preparation, how are we preparing people for those jobs? And job access, are our residents able to access those jobs, both in terms of the education they have and in actual transportation? And so those are conversations that sort of usually occur in silos, but our goal was to sort of break down those silos and make sure that we were connected across each of them and that there was strong visibility, not just among the private, in the public sector, but also in the private sector to have a conversation about this. So we launched a partnership with the Brookings Institution, and we created a group called Prosper Birmingham in 2019. So Prosper Birmingham is a partnership that establishes a fund to usher in a knowledge-based economy in Birmingham. And why that's so important is this was not, it was not a top-down initiative. It became something that really occurred as a natural conversation in our community. Yes, there was a deliberate and an intentional conversation around data, but there were also enough stories and enough interaction between members of our community who were unemployed and living in neighborhoods and our business community who were clearly employed and working downtown. And so what we really wanted to do is sort of bridge this gulf through a partnership. And we created 3 goals, 5-year goals that are pretty bold. Our goal is to create 1,000 new firms, or to expand 1,000 new firms, so 250 new firms in the community, but to deliberately identify 750 existing firms to create 10,000 jobs, and focus especially on the share of those jobs that are going to women and to people of color in our community. So we've sort of got a data-driven approach to that focuses around some of the strengths that we have as sort of competitive advantage in a regional economy, particularly in precision health and logistics. And then I'm going to go over to the far right side of the slide and talk about job access. this is probably the boldest goal that we have, one that I think is particularly challenging, but piloting a long-term commitment in one of our neighborhoods that has been disinvested in. And I'll tell you which community it is. It's Inslee. Inslee was, my mother went to Inslee High School, but now, unfortunately, the building is blighted, and it has fallen down. It had, in the final year of its education, the graduation rate there was a little over 40%, the four-year graduation rate. And so it was also the headquarters of U.S. Steel. So my grandfather worked at U.S. Steel for 55 years. There were 34,000 people who lived and worked in Inslee, Alabama in 1980 for U.S. Steel. Today, there is not a single person who works for U.S. Steel in the city of Birmingham. I say that to just accentuate. I looked at the numbers before this call. In 1990, from 1990 to 2020, our metals manufacturing and production has fallen by 65%, and just in terms of jobs. If you look back at 1980, it would have fallen even further. And I think what's really important is when you're talking to communities across the nation, all of us are in the same boat. The same industries that carried us 20, 30, 40 years ago, if you're not one of those 25 mega cities, those same industries just aren't going to be there. And so we have to build our economy and thus our training programs for the future economy in a dynamic environment where consolidation is occurring rapidly. And we have to encourage our workforce system, our education system, and our economic development system to focus on the unique assets that distinguish regional economies. And the other piece of that is to create vitality among young people, specifically to create firms. We have, in the greater Birmingham area, the population is 28% African American. So of the 1.2 million, the population is 28% African American. Yet the business ownership rate is just 3% African American. So among the nation's top 53 metros, we have the largest disparity, racial disparity in business ownership. If we were to double it, not only would we create about 1,700 jobs, if we were double the number of share of black-owned businesses, we create about 1,700 jobs. But more than that, we would increase our long-term economic competitiveness. So a big piece of how we're coming out of COVID is focusing on supporting black-owned businesses and encouraging black entrepreneurs. What we're going to spend most of the conversation today is around the central goal around job preparation, specifically connecting 2,000 young, struggling residents to better quality jobs. So we created a program called Birmingham Promise. The Promise program is in many ways not dissimilar to the programs that you've seen across the nation. There are about 200 College Promise programs throughout the country, but what we wanted to do is more fully integrate the business community into the Birmingham Promise, but we also wanted to use dynamic data so that we were having conversations with mothers of a student at Hudson K-8 or a father of a student at Huffman High School, and they could speak honestly and openly to their family about what positions would be available in their community 5, 10, 15 years from now. And obviously we don't have a crystal ball. We can't predict that. But we wanted the same data that I had as the city's sort of chief economic developer. I wanted to make sure that that data was democratized at the fundamental unit so that the families that we were talking to could make informed decisions. And one way to do that and also create co-investment, not just from the public sector, but from the private sector, is to make sure that the private sector is at the table at an early stage. So again, these are the data that we were wrestling with. Why did we want to push this? We knew that 54% of our high school students pursue college. We also knew that 55% of them lived in poverty. And even after the Pell Grant was applied, our students were taking on average each year collectively about $15 to $20 million of student debt. So when you start to think about what the effect that has on a community long term, if I were thinking about debt from a home ownership standpoint, that's quite a significant number. People don't talk about student debt in terms of its suppressing home ownership rates, but it is a huge issue in communities like ours, particularly majority minority communities that have been underinvested in for a very long time. So Birmingham is one of Alabama is one of 5 states where average student debt right now exceeds average family income. And I think that number, perhaps more than any other, has alarmed me, that student debt is actually greater than the average family income, particularly in the Birmingham community. So we need to do something pretty different. So we looked around the nation at what was going well. Many of you know the Kalamazoo Promise. It has increased enrollment inside the school system by 25%, but it also increases racial equity. The Buffalo Promise program in New York has helped narrow the racial achievement gap and increase overall graduation rate. It also has created population recovery. So the central city and neighborhoods have actually grown in population as these Promise programs have been rolled out across the country. So our vision was that every one of our students, and these are the 23 students who got apprenticeships first, was to walk across the graduation stage with a pathway to a quality job, and every employer in a high-growth industry establishes a talent pipeline. What I want to do right now, and unfortunately it looks like my screen is not sharing my face, but if you could see my face right now, you'd see me smiling. I got to know several of these students. Tavares' story is a pretty incredible one, where he is a student. He's the bottom right photo. He's a student who now is at Alabama A&M University. He knew he wanted to be a mechanical engineer, but had never met one. He goes to Altech and not only gets a job working with mechanical engineers every day, he now has a whole slew of mentors who call and they say to him, "How was your first semester at Alabama A&M?" And then when he finishes next summer, he has got a job lined up with Altech. I could say similar stories about 6 or 7 or 8 of these students who, by virtue of their own hard work, their own ability to influence things at age 17 or 18, inside a company, they receive jobs themselves. So it has been a maybe the most rewarding aspect of my job is to watch real and heartfelt connection occur between mostly white corporations in Birmingham and to start to build bridges to the mostly black students and families in Birmingham. And we're starting to see this really shape our future economy. One of my favorite students, Zamora, told me when she entered the program, she said, "You know, Dr. Carpenter, I appreciate all that you're trying to do, but I'm leaving Birmingham and I'm never looking back." She told me that as a result of Birmingham Promise, she now believes in the city. She believes it as a place for her and her creativity and her capacities. And I don't think that it's hyperbolic to say that that's a trend. And it's because these investments don't appear to be political because they're not. They are legitimately tied into, I think, what people are seeing in our community as a long-term investment in their workforce and in the competitiveness of the region more broadly. So this is how it works. We have 4 primary industry clusters, and we really went deep on youth apprenticeships. So the idea is you come in as a junior year, you can get an introductory level apprenticeship. And in some cases, this mirrors what we've seen in Switzerland and the German model. In fact, I spent about a month studying the German model in Germany to sort of put some of this together. So it's an adapted version of it. And we're working with the state right now to get apprenticeship credentials for each of these. But what's been wonderful is, independent of the credentials, which I think all of us agree are extremely important and something that we're working towards and are seeking to refine, we have created online content that sort of meets students where they are. We are partnering with a group called LRNG, which is works closely with Southern New Hampshire University and College for America. And what I found fascinating by this is that it's not about a syllabus or that you and I took when we went to college. Instead, they have playlists like you might have on your Spotify. right now. And so your courses are actually sort of micro-credentials on your playlist. And so it's a more seamless asynchronous learning platform. And what we found is that actually really comports well with what a lot of the sort of hands-on learning looks like at each of these different internships and apprenticeships. And then their senior year, they'll go through sort of a more rigorous apprenticeship. And then obviously in graduation, they can either get a post-secondary scholarship to a 2- and 4-year institution, public 2- and 4-year institution, or they can go straight into the workforce, or they can combine and go to the workforce while going to school, which is happening probably more than any other case. What I want to kind of double down on here is the stories about apprenticeships. The first thing is the city sort of subsidized all the apprenticeships at $12 an hour in the junior year and $15 an hour in their senior year. What has been interesting is that many companies have actually said, we really want to co-invest with you in the second year. And so we're actually, now the city's paying half of the wages in the junior and senior year, so $6 for juniors and $7.50 for seniors, but then the company pays the other half. We have right at about 100 companies who signed up, from the largest companies in our community to startups, and it's been, the matching day experience was truly phenomenal. Students, for those of you who follow college signing day for sports, they wear the hats and the T-shirts of their new companies, and they move forward, and they keep us posted on their opportunities there. But a lot of that's been disrupted by COVID, and in fact, we had to cancel our spring apprenticeships in mid-March, and then we're going to cancel them in the fall, but we're working towards a more digital solution in the spring. What is really important for me to say here again is that this has invited a whole host of regional employers to the conversation about talent investment and talent production that didn't previously exist. So in late May, Birmingham was we were awarded a PIA grant from the New America Foundation, and we have several partners who were focused on that. But the youth apprenticeship focus continues to be something that we're thinking hard about. Tavares' story is the one I mentioned to you earlier. I'll tell another quick story, and you can read the Tavares's. So Curtis, he was a student who came in to the Birmingham Promise and said, I really, really want to go to Alabama State, which is an HBCU in Montgomery, and study marketing. He went to SHIP and was put on their customer success team, and succeeded so much they have offered him a job there, and he is actually working for SHIP while he is in Birmingham. Or in Montgomery. So we launched Birmingham Promise again in 2020. And so I want to say this quickly, and then I'm going to jump into some questions, and then I'd be happy to talk to you about what we're thinking about sort of post-COVID and how that's altered pieces of this. So one piece that I think has been really interesting is we are using real-time data analytics. I should have pulled up sort of how we think about that. Labor market data, generally speaking, is about 6 months behind the actual labor market. And so we work with Burning Glass to pull real-time data postings. And so Burning Glass basically scrapes job sites, not just like Indeed and LinkedIn, but actual company job sites to identify job opportunities available in Birmingham at the time. And so that's been a huge opportunity for us, because we're constantly refining curricula. We're constantly refining where we're seeking to put people and place people. And we're using that data to then train success coaches, both at the schools and at colleges, so that people can make these decisions. So there's a data-enabled conversation, and our real vision here is to sort of democratize the labor market data. We also believe, and I'll take this as sort of a bottom right piece, 55% of students in Birmingham are in poverty and over 90% are African American. We believe that we may have the most diverse in terms of who the student population is. We may have the most diverse Promise program in the country. And then the third component here is that this isn't just about public leadership that's put in money. We put in $10 million. This is also about private leadership. Right now we have about $20 million that has been raised by the local community, and we've circled a good bit more to try to make this a long-term program. So I'll say this really quickly, and it's particularly emotional, I think, after John on the day of John Lewis's funeral. He lied and stayed here in Alabama just a couple of days before he lied and stayed at the national capital. As Birmingham goes, so goes the nation. My office, and Greg knows this, but my office, where I go to work every day, physically inside Birmingham City Hall, is in Bull Connor's old office. So in the same space where Bull Connor actually issued the order for fire hoses and dogs on children marching for equality in Kelly Ingram Park, and in the same way that he voted to make sure that companies would segregate and deny opportunities to Black people, it is now my job, it is now the mayor's job, in the same physical space, to think creatively, to think deliberately, to think systematically about how to create opportunities for the descendants of those children and their grandchildren. And I think I have to underscore that point, because, just as there's irony in the fact that John Lewis lied and stayed in the Alabama Capitol just a few feet from Jefferson Davis's statue, right, the man who led the Confederacy. It's about more than statues. And yes, we pulled our statue down too, just like every other community. But there is a systematic underinvestment, and that has manifested itself in de facto outcomes that are deplorable, that nobody would want to see. And I think where Birmingham is right now is that it's confronted a lot of these systematic barriers, and that regardless of the way the conversation is framed, people in our business community, regardless of their political affiliation, have come to realize that the only sustainable path forward is to make transformational investments that have upended the systemic racism that have prevented so many people who want a job at their company from being prepared for their jobs when they get there. And it's going to require their co-investment. And I think that is where we are. And I'll say this to you because I think it's really important. Every time I get this chance to speak to a national audience, I say that the right version of America, America's best version of itself, has a place for the Birminghams of the world in it. There are 100 cities that are almost just like us, who are trying to sort of recover their economic identity, who are reckoning with the challenges of COVID-19, who are also trying to identify a way forward in a more competitive, globally consolidated economy. And I think it's important for all of us to figure out how we can make sure that places like Birmingham have a role not just in our economy, but again in building the best version of our country. I have a couple of different questions. So Greg, I'll defer to you on how you want to do questions here. I see some in the chat box, but I really do want to reserve as much time as possible for questions.
Great, thanks so much, Josh. There's so many pieces that you put out, and I'm hard to know where to start. But let's start with a question about that my colleague Monica Mean put in. She writes, "Seems like a very promising program, and I like the shared matching investment. Are you conducting a cost-benefit analysis on the project?" And if I could just expand that question and ask, what research or documentation are you doing of your efforts to measure the success that you're having, any costs, and what the outcomes are?
So I'll be honest with the first part, which is that we have not invested as much in a we're doing a sort of traditional business level cost benefit analysis, but we're not where we want to be in terms of rigorously tracking down research to assess the efficacy of the program itself. And that's something that we're working on right now. The Promise program really only established itself this year, and so it's sort of an object in motion. But I'm a researcher by training myself. My research is in political economy. I looked at sort of the economics of voting, but I care very much about how we're influencing a variety of pieces here. But the cost benefit, I think, is pretty basic for us. We are right now, businesses are doing cost benefits analyses inside their own companies. So, for example, Regions Bank looked at the time that they spent sort of preparing, hiring, and bringing on students, and then what they think that's saving them long term. So we're doing it sort of an individual and company level basis. And then from the scholarship perspective, we're really relying on research from other institutions who've done this before. The Upjohn Institute, which is out of Kalamazoo and largely has a lot of research on Promise programs. That's the research we've been pulling together. But my hope is, and I've been in conversations with the Federal Reserve, the University of Alabama, that we can do a more rigorous program evaluation of the program, and we hope to get that in place as early as the fall, but particularly we would like to get it in place for the spring. We have longitudinal surveys of the students who went through their first apprenticeship program. Obviously, that was interrupted, so it's been sort of slowed down, and it has given us a chance to sort of reassess what we need to do next. But I hope that answers your question. The short answer is we need to invest in a rigorous research proposal, and that's something that I'm certainly open to thinking through with all of you.
Great, thanks, Josh. I'd like to focus on the apprenticeship angle. I sort of have a multi-stage question. I put this in the notes field. I'd like to learn more about the apprenticeship program. First, how many employers are offering these apprenticeships? This is a question from our colleague Andrea Wilson. And if you could describe the scaling process, what it looks like, did it look like? And did you start with a half dozen employers and then expand? How did you scale that up?
So we did a pilot apprenticeship program in the fall of 2019, and that was with 22 employers and 23 students. It was pretty successful. In fact, I think it was really successful for a pilot program, and with some initial data on that I think would be interesting, and I should actually synthesize that, but around student confidence, around connections inside community. So in other words, sort of a more quantitative definition of what I mentioned about Curtis and Tavares' stories, where they now had connections inside the industries that they hope to be in one day. And so that's how we started. And then through that, and largely through word of mouth and interest, we had 65 companies distinct from those first 22 who came forward and said, we really want an apprenticeship. And now I can't go, well, I haven't gone to the farmer's market in a long time, but when I used to go to the farmer's market, I would get stopped by employers who would say, it would be wonderful if we could hire an apprentice. And so I have a list of another 20 or 30 companies in addition to, I think, the 85 that we have who want to hire apprentices. In each of those companies, I will say the biggest challenge has been not a willingness to get involved or hire students. It's, what does this look like? How does this work for me? Our typical approach is, and we have sort of a playbook that we hand companies. In fact, we call it the Apprenticeship Playbook, and it was co-created by companies who've had apprentices. We have asked them to help us actually talk about what the process is like It's different in each industry, obviously, particularly, and the size of companies. We've had a venture capital firm, we've had the zoo, we've had kind of everybody under the sun, and so it's not a one-size-fits-all playbook, but it certainly gives people an idea of what it will take to sort of successfully implement that program. The most important piece is a mentor, and making sure that the student has somebody they can talk to every day on with the company, and that's been, I think, by far the most important piece of the puzzle. Two major pieces happen there. One, the mentor feels engaged. They feel like their company is promoting them, is giving them an opportunity to lead. And then two, that person is typically a younger person in the company. Oftentimes, it's a person of color. And so the relational piece that they have with the students ends up becoming truly heartwarming. I mean, we had a student who had surgery, and her mentor, I saw this week. Her social media, her mentor and I are friends, and they posted on social media her in the hospital recovery room together. And it's just a truly powerful set of relationships that would not have happened. But those relationships are absolutely integral to the learning environment. And so we're trying to work also with those companies to sort of adapt learning modules for them. So the first set of modules that we developed for apprenticeships were basically focused on professional development, on workforce readiness, sort of the whole battery of skills that we all know are important in a workplace. Understanding how to work with, digital, creating digital fluency across a domain of expertise, and from Microsoft Suite to Google Suite, et cetera. But then there was the soft skills piece that was also really, really important. And so now we're getting into more refined curricular content for seniors in particular, so that they can learn sort of the industry domain a little bit more specifically. That part's harder. It's a little messier, to be honest, and we're working with an instructional design coach now, but it's definitely been something that has been important for us to put forward as a possibility, because we're finding that particularly the HR officers at each of these companies, they want to be involved in shaping that curriculum. So it's been I think a really important dynamic conversation in our community.
Thanks, Josh. Let me ask you a little bit more about apprenticeship, just so we know what the baseline was. How much time do students spend in these youth apprenticeships, and starting at what grade level?
Yeah, so they spend 20 hours a week for 15 weeks in the fall and spring semesters, and they begin in their junior year. We're going to try to start some externships, is what we're kind of calling them. Germany does this in the 8th grade level. We'll probably try to do it at the 9th or 10th grade level, where you can actually do sort of a week with an apprentice that's older in the high school. But the goal is 15 weeks and 20 hours a week at each of the apprenticeships each of the apprenticeship locations beginning in the junior year.
And then how are you adapting this? I'm really intrigued about this idea of replacing the youth apprenticeships with a digital solution. How are you thinking about that? Everyone's struggling with this right now.
Well, I'll be the first to say that we are struggling with it too. I don't think that we've got it figured out, and I love solutions, but there's two ways that we're thinking about it. One is, actually sort of piloting especially among our tech companies who are really eager to get this back. I mean, it's been fascinating actually to see how many companies have called me and said, I'm really disappointed. I feel like we could have adapted our model. And I understand that. One piece of the puzzle for us is, again, it sort of comes back to this job access bucket, Greg. I mean, we have 32% of our households who do not have an internet service provider. 32% in 2020. So wow. the conversation for us is, number one, does our student have a device? If not, can you provide them one? The second is, does our student have internet? If not, can you provide them a hotspot? And so we're actually, working at, we spent about $9 million to try to make sure that we can remedy that problem, especially since we're going online in the first 9 weeks of the school system for all students. So I think that was sort of the initial challenge this March. And I think that it's different for each company. Some companies, some automotive and advanced manufacturing companies actually have an online curriculum with where they could actually ship potentially some wearables so that someone could sort of simulate some activities that, whether it's, painting the inside of a door panel or, sealing a windshield. That's, this is sort of some more avant-garde technology. It's costly. But that is one potential option, is that we use a combination of sort of VR, especially where it can be quickly deployed on sort of the manufacturing side. But, a lot of it is still going to be around sort of asking companies what they are capable of doing to teach someone. And in some cases, there's a company here called Pack Health. Pack Health has their digital health coaching model. They feel like they could actually have more apprentices now because they feel like their model lends itself to just a work from home model, and they think their mentor could actually take on, instead of having one apprentice per mentor, they think they could have two. So that's a conversation that I think is ongoing, but it's pretty context based, and so I don't think we've nailed it down yet, but it's one that we're still gonna keep pushing towards.
Josh, I want to be true to our word that we're doing an hour program. The federal lunch hour is an hour, and but I don't want to stop the program because I have so many questions, and some of my colleagues may wish to stay on and dig into some of these other bits. So what I think I'd like to do is gavel the official program closed. Thank you for being with us, and invite my colleagues to stay on for a little bit longer while we talk amongst ourselves a little bit. We can ask other questions, and we'll just extend this a little bit, do a little overtime here. So when I saw your presentation, I noticed that you were starting with your timeline. I think it was a 2017 timeline. You talked about the praise that you got from the Wall Street Journal with the high-tech program and all of that. My question was, just to understand the timeline, was the Birmingham Promise program already in place that got you there?
Well, the short answer is no. The Wall Street Journal article actually just praised us for going over to try to learn from Germany. I mean, literally, that was it. It wasn't, you've got a program in place. It was, this community is admitting that it needs to do something transformational. And at that point, we were still very much in the formative stages, and still are. I think that, one of the things that I've gotten really comfortable saying is that, in the great words of John Lewis in his editorial this morning, he says democracy is not a state, it is an act. And I think that's how we have to start thinking about workforce development as well. It is not a state. It is not a static set of projects and programs. It has got to be dynamic. It has to be an active and an active conversation. And I think that those conversations could occur much more productively at the regional level if we can create some connectivity. And so what we did was actually the mayor and I went over to Germany for a week with another member of the city council here, and really the woman behind all this program who's making this work is a woman named Rachel Harmon. She's just doing phenomenal work. So she's studied it as well. And then we actually did a deeper dive with our business leadership to make sure that they understood sort of how an apprenticeship program in Birmingham could be modified, not it won't be the German program, it won't be the Swiss program, but it could be modified. And so I think we've had a lot of conversations about that. And the Wall Street Journal really, that piece really was just about our sort of candid admission that we were wrestling with a system that was broken and that we needed to fix it.
I see. So I want to go back in a minute and talk more about what you've accomplished and some of the challenges you faced. But let's stop for a moment and think about the future. What are you planning next? What is your next aspiration to expand and deepen the programs that you're doing? Where's this going next?
Yeah, so I have a couple of extra slides here. So around how COVID sort of shifted our focus, and I'll talk a little bit about that because I think it'll be important, and I appreciate the question. So Birmingham, not unlike many other communities, nearly 20% of workers have filed for unemployment. The kicker here is Birmingham was particularly vulnerable to a recession, given that most of our workers were low skill or non-digital middle skill workers. So, broadening their skills to make sure that they had an opportunity in the next economy was really, really important. So we pivoted a lot of attention to adult reskilling, and in a way that I think is maybe ironic, we actually work with a lot of parents of Birmingham Promise students. So I think that should be revealing, is that some of our workforce work now is a two-generation strategy. We're working with a 17 or 18-year-old student for Birmingham Promise, and we're finding a 37 to 38-year-old mother who's lost a job. She's an office administrative support worker and can't find work. And so we created something called the Birmingham Strong Service Corps. It's been really, it was really kind of built so that we could quickly redeploy workers, particularly workers who did not qualify for unemployment, so workers who were getting 1099 benefits in a variety of places, to meet growing and emerging needs in our community. Whether it was transporting people who had COVID or safely transporting them in a vehicle that we designed for that transport, or delivering food to people who needed it, or making calls to residents of the public housing community, or even logistically operating testing sites. So we've done a lot of those types of jobs in Birmingham, and sort of become this de facto group to turn to when you had a COVID-related emerging need. And so that group has employed about 400 people to do regular work, paying them about $20 an hour, which has been really helpful. But now what we're trying to figure out is how we reskill people for the long haul. And for us, that is, we're actually pursuing CARES Act funding at the state level to make sure that we can reskill those folks. And I'll show you this photo. I think this is sort of a late breaking thought, but this is a photo. These are photos of the Duomo, Greg, and I don't know how many of you have been to the Duomo, but basically any other cathedral in Europe, when you walk in, you're overwhelmed by the beauty of the place, its architecture, and what's fascinating to me is my wife studied in Florence, and one of the things she told me about the Duomo is that when they laid the foundation stones of the Duomo, they actually did not know how the dome was going to be closed. In 1296, when the original stones were laid, there was not the architectural or engineering innovation to figure out how they could close the dome. So the people who laid the foundation stones knew a couple of things. Number one, they were betting on the future to solve the problems they didn't know how to solve. Number two, they were building something that they knew they themselves wouldn't see the benefits of. And I think what communities have to ask themselves right now is, what are the cathedrals we're going to build? What are the stones that we're going to lay today that 2 and 3 and 4 generations from now, people are going to appreciate we have laid? And I think it really does have to be a regional question, particularly in places like Birmingham, these second-tier markets where consolidation and banking, for example, is going to make New York stronger. Consolidation and technology will make San Francisco stronger. And yes, I think some of the work from home and work remote opportunities will help communities sort of, bump along. But what are the things that the Birmingham, the Des Moines, the Buffaloes, what are those communities going to call out as, this is something that we're going to make transformational investments in so that we can be uniquely competitive for a long term and create jobs? And so for us, the question is, for all those adults, for all the people who are coming through our programs, if we really want to be honest with them, we need to start talking about what we're investing in that we hope will pay dividends in the future. In Birmingham, we've decided that that's going to be precision population health. It's the merger of sort of the formal population health that many of us are familiar with, that has been proven again and again to help with chronic disease management, but also leveraging newer technologies like precision medicine. UAB and Southern Research happen to rank very highly in NIH funding in all three of those categories: population health, precision medicine, and bioinformatics. And we believe that if we make the right set of investments, that Birmingham can be a job hub for that particular line of work. And so I think what we're trying to do now, and I think what all these communities have to ask themselves, is what are the cathedrals you're going to build, and then how do you convince your community, particularly your business community, to invest in something that may not reflect their self-interest. And I think what you'll find is that many people across this country, they care as much about their community as they do the well-being of their own company. And I think, that's been proven again and again here. And so those are the questions I think that we're having to ask ourselves. So I think the next frontier of thinking for me is, how do we create simultaneously transformational investments to grow jobs in precision health while building the workforce to make sure they can take advantage of those jobs, either those jobs that are grown through innovations here locally or through jobs that are recruited in from other communities. So that's what I'm thinking a lot about.
Josh, I want to follow up on this idea about asking companies to invest in something that may not accrue in the short run to their bottom line. I'm not sure exactly how you put it. I was struck by this important figure of $20 an hour. This is something that could be very meaningful for a lot of families, to have youth being able to take home $20 an hour. My question is, do the companies that pay this believe they're getting that much value from having these students and the time and work that they're doing in these programs, or do they consider it mostly essentially a charitable contribution?
Yeah. So the way, so the $20 an hour, there's we have sort of three different payment levels, Greg. So there's $12 an hour for juniors, $15 an hour for senior high school students. The $20 an hour is what we're actually paying adults. And when I say we, it's money that we, the city, and Birmingham Strong as a nonprofit entity, have committed to paying workers who do difficult tasks. And in many cases, they're putting themselves at risk while doing it. So I'll focus on the 12 and 15. It's interesting. There's a lot of research, Greg, on in Germany about when companies sort of realize value of this investment. And the reality is that juniors are probably the equivalent of a 25% of an FTE, a full-time employee. But seniors could be between 50 and 75% of a full-time employee. And so I think that mirrors in many cases what we think and what our employers are saying, is that, if I've got a student that I can invest in for multiple years, if they know my business, they share my company's values, I know the type of worker they are, they now know people inside my company who have vouched for them, they can begin to add value more quickly than people might assume. And by the time they've worked there for 4, 5, 6 months, they're not producing at the same level an FTE might at the same hourly rate, but they are producing quite a bit. And so when we're kind of paying half of those salaries, Greg, I think they see us underwriting with them a co-investment in individuals who could potentially populate the leadership ranks of their country, of their company in 10, 15, or 20 years.
Well, I think we could probably spend the whole afternoon learning about what you're doing and the struggles that you've undergone to do this. Let me ask a final question. What has been most hard? What has been most difficult for you and your colleagues in standing up and maintaining this program? Have people been inconvenienced by what you're doing in any way, that you have opposition? What's that nature of that opposition and what you're doing about it?
Great question. I would say there's sort of two forms of opposition. One is, unfortunately, some people just aren't as committed to the racial equity component as we are. So they don't carry that value into the work. So, there's as many good stories as we have about apprenticeships. We have a story about an apprenticeship where a young woman said, "I'm the only woman and I'm the only person of color on my floor, and I don't feel comfortable." And I don't think that the company that hired them felt like they were doing her a disservice. In fact, I think they thought that they were doing her a service by having her come on to their team. But they had not sort of followed our pretty intense guidelines of, here's how this is successful for you and the student. And so I think that's part of it, is that some people still view this work as charity, and it's not. It should be seen as is there a charitable component to it? Absolutely. But at its, in the main, it should be seen as an investment in the long-term viability of a regional workforce. The second sort of piece is knitting together a structure in a complex adaptive system, right? One that, is changing leadership constantly, whether it's the, superintendent of the school system, or building, new student success coaches, or companies that are shifting CEOs, or even mayoral transitions. Building a system that can adapt to change, and getting institutions that are notorious for not working with one another to work with one another. And so I think finding champions is the hardest part. You got to find champions at all levels of the organization, and that's what's been the most revelatory piece. A year ago, we had unbelievable buy-in between all the CEOs, the superintendent, and the top folks who were in leadership and instructional design in the school system. But then there are a whole host of people who then have to fall into not just an understanding, but a commitment. And it can't be that, their CEO told them to do this, or the superintendent asked them to do this, and that's why they did it. There has to be buy-in at the managerial unit level, at the fundamental unit. People have to carry this into core values of who they are and what they want to achieve. And so I think what's important is a relentless commitment to create buy-in and establish a sense of shared values, not just at the executive leadership level, but all throughout the organization. And I think that takes time, and it's frustrating at times, and so boosting the morale of the team who are putting this together is really, really important. And so, I think all of those pieces are really sort of fundamental to making it successful, but those are the two biggest challenges.
Josh, I was thinking how to ask, thank you for being with us and spending the time with the Department of Education. But rather than put my own words out here, let me just read the words of our colleague, Brittany Beth, who wrote in the chat room, in the chat feature, "I grew up in Birmingham and my mom taught in Birmingham public schools. I'm very excited to see the investment you are making in the community and the vision for partnerships with businesses. Thank you for sharing. I'm looking forward to seeing how Birmingham changes as a result." And I think that captures it from our side, from Office of Career, Technical and Adult Ed, and for the Department of Education. Thanks for being with us, and we look forward to hearing more from you again in the future.
Many
Bye-bye.
thanks, Greg. My pleasure. Appreciate you. Thank you.